When I look back at my whole story, while I want to package a lot of it in like I didn't know better, I wasn't conscious, and I was reacting, the truth is I also gathered a lot of like skills and tools and wisdom and artifacts along the way that totally are fueling the fires of my success in life now.
Welcome to Small Acts of Rebellion, a podcast where the unspoken narratives at the intersection of our personal and professional lives come to light. I'm your host, Heather Pridemore, your guide on this journey of discovery and defiance. Join me as we uncover the rebellious spirit that shapes our careers and lives. It's time to own your story. Are you ready?
Today's guest is Kasey Clark, a fellow podcaster, co-creator, and co-host of the Soulstirred podcast, Stories of Growth and the Human Experience. Kasey is also a licensed therapist, certified professional leadership coach, certified Dare to Lead facilitator, and student of the Enneagram. Kasey is fulfilled by her life's work and most enjoys helping people learn there is nothing wrong with you, and helping people to have more passionate, playful, creative, and connected relationships, starting with themselves and with each other. Kasey loves learning, hiking, road trips, and her doodle dog Duncan, like the donut.
Thanks so much for having me, Heather. I'm so glad to be here.
Now, Kasey, I think our story of how we know each other is probably one of the more interesting because I met you on your podcast, Soulstirred. And so that was the first time you and I had ever met, sort of face to face, even though we were following each other and kind of knew what was going on in each other's corners of the world. And so one thing led to another and we started getting to know each other.
Yeah. I attribute all of that to Emily, who, as you know, I think the two of you are in the She Network together. And so I think being connected with her has brought so many beautiful and colorful things into my life. So shout out to gratefulness for Emily, and you are one of them. And you were on our show, and I just immediately felt synergy with you. So I'm thrilled to have this time together and get to know each other a little better.
Yeah, I'm so excited to see where our conversation goes, Kasey. We've been having some really interesting conversations, and recently you said something to me that I thought was just like so absolutely profound. You said, knowing who I am is knowing who I wasn't. So I would love for you to share what it means to learn who we are through the roles that we occupy and by learning who we aren't. And I know you have a lot of thoughts and can share a lot of perspective on this. And so tell me about your journey, Kasey, and how you sort of see this, idea of like knowing who we are by knowing who we aren't.
Start with a big question, Heather. I think I want to speak for myself, because I think that's the only thing I can speak to with both honesty and respect. That's the experience I know best in the world. And I'm one of these people who's sort of wired that I experience the world through my felt experience. So what I mean by that in response to your question is I was born into a family as the youngest of 3 siblings. And the story that has been told to me is that my mom made the choice to have me at a time when her marriage was really struggling to our father. And so her belief was maybe save the marriage by having a baby. And they separated and ultimately became divorced when I was still in my infancy. And so I actually really put that part of the story together for myself when I was around 19 and taking a class about self-esteem with one of my first mentor, role model, powerful wisdom woman in the world. Her name was Rosa Mazzone. So I'm in a self-esteem class with Rosa, and this story comes up and I share it, and she says, "Oh, so you entered the world sort of with a stamp on your head like I'm wrong. I failed because they had me to save the marriage and then it didn't." So that was interesting. What I know is how that was playing out for me throughout my life is my entire family, my mother, father, sister, brother, and some other extraneous like in-laws and people we've known along the way, all had careers with the federal government. Good careers. Now, in retrospect, that I look back, like they all served the government for, a period of decades to where they earned pensions and retirements and have things like health insurance for the rest of their life. Some people would call this a very logical, and sensical path to take in life. In the case of my mother, sister, and brother, they all retired early enough to still have independent, autonomous businesses of their own while collecting these pensions and retirements and enjoying the privilege of health insurance that's accounted for. I say all of these things at this point in my life because these are things I long for. And at 52, I'm still figuring out how to account for myself because I took a different path. And this is what I meant when I said to you, some of what I've learned about myself over my life has learned from like needing to experience things in a way that they don't work out for me in order to go, well, wait, maybe there was some wisdom in what some people were offering me or how they were guiding or mentoring me that I just couldn't listen to at the time for whatever reason, because we all have to find our own way is the reason, of course. So I knew from what I was observing in these role models in my family that I wasn't made for a federal government employment. To me, it looked like rules and constraints and disappointment. What I observed is these other people who I'm related to, who all of us are really wired for things like growth and expansion and what's possible here and what's wanting to happen and trying to happen. We're those kind of people in the world. What I saw was that part of them never gets to fully blossom inside of this system that is like, here's how things are done and how things have always been done. And anyhow, I resisted. I knew that I wasn't made to do what I saw all of them doing and wanted to go a different way. But then interestingly, I'd say sort of the next juncture in life, I'm like in my 30s. I'm married for the second time. I have 2 children that are little at the time. And I remember coming face to face with this sort of existential question like, who's been driving the bus of my life? How did I get here? Did I choose any of this for myself? I had a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in counseling and 2 young children, and I was working as a social worker in the field of child protective services, child welfare. And I was telling myself a story, which has some truth to it, that I loved the work that I was in, that it felt like I was getting to do work that I loved and that it mattered, that I was a human helper. I knew that that was true about me, and the deliciousness of what it was like to work surrounded by other professionals who value what I value, which is things like give us a flexible work environment. Let us decide things like when we come in and when we leave, and then watch us perform and create results and do whatever it takes, including work as many hours as it takes to get the work done. I feel like you can relate a little bit to this kind of wiring, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a couple things that you're saying, Kasey, that I'm kind of feeling resonate with me. And I know just from some of the clients that I've worked with would also resonate with many of them. And so when you were talking about like, did I choose this? There was like a couple things I thought maybe the two of us could unpack there, because I think sometimes, and this happens, I think probably to a lot of people, you have this sort of inflection point in your journey and you're like, wait, how did I get here? And sometimes it's a matter of some reflection and just trying to make sense of like what has transpired to come to this point. And I do think sometimes there's some rationalization about, like in my own story, I think I shared this with you and Emily, but there was this story I was telling myself that I was strategic, right? I was navigating all of these things. And in my mind, my rationalization was that it was strategy. But at the same time, and something we haven't talked about before is in one period of my career, I had this moment and I'd gone through some big life changes. I had climbed the corporate ladder very quickly. I had just had a baby. I had been married for a number of years and I was still relatively young. My husband and I got married when I was just shy of 24. So I've been married a long time. And there was this moment where I felt like I was coming out of a fog. And my life had been so much on autopilot. I was doing all of the things I was supposed to do. I was married, I had a baby, I was climbing the corporate ladder. And I thought, kind of like you were saying, how did I get here? Is this what I want for myself? And so, sort of the other thing that I was thinking about as you were talking, Kasey, was sometimes two or more things can be true at the same time. So, when you were saying, like, I was telling myself a story that I was enjoying my work, sometimes we do tell ourselves stories to navigate difficult situations, but sometimes the stories are true, but also in conflict with other things that we might be feeling or thinking. And so, I don't know where this conversation will take us, Kasey, but I think there's some like fun, nitty gritty life career stuff we could probably unpack here.
And you totally get it. Yeah. Everything you just said is hell yes for me. And some of what you've gathered, it took me more years to polish some of those rocks. So I'll just kind of traverse back and forth because to something you just said, I wanted to highlight what I feel now like I have discovered and I hold as true for me is that this feeling that I had at the time where I was called to a career in child welfare, I think was actually this part of me that was this harmed little person, which I tell that story in Soulstirred's first episode, so we don't need to go into that now. And I was out doing to the world the work of protecting and saving because there was something in me that wanted to be protected and saved. I think that just like sets important context for the conversation that we're about to have. Because for me, that coming out of the fog that you described moment happened years later after what I'd now describe as that there was a hustler in me, like as the youngest of this family, and at least emotionally being stamped with this, I sort of failed as soon as I was born. It's like I was born and started running a race to try to catch up with the people who were in front of me and hadn't until well into my adulthood really slowed down to even notice and ask myself questions like, why am I running? What am I running towards? What's fueling the run? Whose race am I even in? And do I care to be here? Really important questions, you know? Yeah. And you know how I think they say, like, in the body keeps the score, listen to your body when it whispers at you so that it doesn't have to start screaming. Well, again, back to my wiring, I'm not, my self-preservation instinct is not my primary. I am wired more for like on the lookout always for moments that are going to light me up, and I'm following them. And from that, life sort of unfolds. And it's interesting what you said about the both and, because I think about where I am in my life circumstantially, even right now, and how sort of twisted and tangled up in knots I have felt about some really big decisions for several years. And then I think back to my early 20s when I met a person and fell in love and quickly found out there was a baby on the way, and allowed all of these pretty seriously major life decisions to just sort of happen to me. And how, in retrospect, how I know how just right they all were. And so then I fast forward to myself today and I'm like, and so why? What is taking so long to, like, what are you afraid of? What are the edges that want to be leapt across? And what needs to be let go of to take the leap? And then marrying that with this now wisdom is what I'd call it, of what life in the fog is really about. Life in the fog is a stirred up nervous system. that's reacting and hustling and pleasing and numbing and hiding out from truth. And so, yeah, it is this interesting like dichotomy all of the time and sort of dancing in between, and then holding within that the space for humanness. Our human brains so badly want to have things figured out and to know what's happening and what's about to happen and where I'm going and what the plan is. And I mean, I say this sort of lightheartedly. And the truth was, when it first happened to me, when I first was sitting with myself and noticed I have no vision for the future. I've never been without vision for the future. That was a destabilizing place for me to be, but I think it was all coming out of the fog, as you say, and coming face to face with those questions of like, who's here? Who am I? And for me, it was part of like shedding some of the roles. So the timing of my fog lift co-occurred around the death of my dad, the leaving the nest of both of my kids. They were gone and off into college, needing me less to be their mom. It's like it takes a breaking down of roles, I think, in whatever way the universe wants to have that breakdown occur, to really find, or it did for me, for whatever is this one true self to even begin to emerge. And I'm still learning who that is.
Kasey, the word or the phrase like sense making keeps coming into my head. And let me just unpack my own thoughts here for a second, because I keep like sense making is almost like a neon light flashing, and understanding at least that journey from my own perspective, right? Of how, whether it was coming through the fog or trying to understand my place in the universe or why I'm on the path or the journey that I'm on, and trying to make all that sense of my history and my future, and how not only is that kind of always a constant, because as new information comes into the fold, right, as more and more history starts happening behind me, it starts to shift, at least for me, some of the context of how I'm experiencing things that maybe I thought I had made sense of. And then I get a new piece of information and I'm like, wait, that seems different now, or I feel differently about that, or it fits the puzzle in a way that's different than it used to. And that brings me kind of to where we are now in the conversation we had right before we started recording, where we were talking about sort of like being present and the idea that our journey is always journeying, right? Like it's an evolution, and there really is no true end point, because you're kind of always like adding something or some perspective or some new information, or you kind of sit with something for a while, or you reflect on something, and all of a sudden you learn something new about yourself or about the thing. And I mean, I don't know, I'm very much resonating with a lot of what you're saying, and it runs, I think, parallel to some of my own experiences.
Yeah, it's kind of like, if I can metaphorize, I don't know if that's a word, but I just made it one, what you're saying. It's like I've been talking for years about writing a book, and there's something in me that keeps stalling on actually putting my fingers on the keys and writing the pages, because I want to know first how it ends. And I don't think we ever get to know how it ends. And I think we need to recognize that we're already writing.
Not to get too philosophical, Kasey, but I mean, do you think that we have any like decision in when it ends? So, I mean, if we think, on metaphors, our lives are these stories, and these stories potentially have chapters and like, a prologue, an epilogue, whatever. Do you think that there is any choice in sort of deciding like when something maybe started and when it ended, and being able to kind of close the book, as they say, on certain things?
Choice is an interesting concept, isn't it? And it sort of it's like a close neighbor with control. And I do believe we have those things. And I think we definitely have Well, we need to take responsibility for ourselves and our impact all the time, always. And I think that's on another leverage point with full permission to be who you really are. So it's like yes to choice, and where do you get the information that informs your choice? I think my younger self would have said to that, well, from talking to all the people that I love, that I know care about me, right? Nah. What you get there is a lot of other people's opinions about who they think you should be and how they think you should operate. And often, at least in my experience, relationship comes with encouragement not to change, because people like homeostasis. They like for their own lives to not change as much as possible. Now, where does the information come from? So it's like, yes, I'm at choice all the time. And the person or like the thing that I'm co-leading with is the universe. So I notice synchronicities when I'm thinking something or doing something or about to do something. I check in with the universe to say, like, do you affirm this? And it'll send me signals, song lyrics or a bumper sticker or a set of numbers or something that are like, yeah, you're on the right track. For me, that's what works in choice making. And I think really one of the keys here is, what about judgment? Like not judging any of what it's been or what it is or what it wants to become as good or bad. But what if all of it was a little bit right? And all of it is part of the self-discovery. I was watching this movie yesterday. I think it's on, I don't even know what channel it's on. It doesn't matter, but I think it's called A Family Affair, and it has Nicole Kidman and Zac Efron, and Kathy Bates is in it. Well, it turns out that Nicole Kidman's a writer in the show, and she's having this conversation with Kathy Bates, who is also her editor. And Kathy says to Nicole, "Why do you write?" And Nicole says, "I write to understand what I think about things that I don't currently understand." And it occurs to me, there's my universal signal. Start writing the book. You don't get to know how it ends. You're going to write it to create the understanding. And I guess I think that the same thing is true in life. We have to have the lived experience to get to the understanding. And yet it's almost like right before the lived experience where we all get a little stuck. Should I or shouldn't I? Go all in on love or hang out in safety and security? Like what's the choice that's before you? And what does it mean if you leap that way versus that way? What do you think? Have you ever been on the edge of something big and not known whether to jump or stay?
Oh gosh, I don't know that I've been faced with that specific sort of choice. I mean, maybe I have, Kasey, and it just now in hindsight, it doesn't seem as profound. I have had moments though that have felt very profound where it was like a choice between myself or others. And so earlier when you were saying that, self-preservation is typically not your default, I relate with that. And I feel like I've gone through a lot of my life's journey to some degree, even in moments when the other party would have said, oh, well, she did what she wanted to do. They don't know how much emotional and mental gymnastics I went through. And in the end, I still compromised on maybe what I really wanted for myself because I didn't want to hurt someone or isolate someone or, make someone like I wanted to put their needs in some ways above my own. And so maybe I made calculations and how I went about doing something. And maybe, there's that saying, like, when you compromise, like nobody's happy.
I just, such a hell yes to what you just said. That feeling right there where the people closest to me have gone, she's always doing whatever she wants to do. When on my insides, it feels like she's never doing what it is she wanted to do without first putting it through all of those filters of what are all these people I love going to think, feel, and how will they be impacted by what I'm about to do? Thanks for naming that. What, please tell me, my friend, has been the lesson of that for you?
If there was kind of an overarching lesson in those experiences, that it's often when you're on the edge of a cliff like that, or you're walking through your life with a hand grenade and the keys pulled out, you've let yourself go so long, not fulfilling yourself, right? Not making sure you're taking care of you, that now you don't care if it all blows up because it's just gotten so far off track. And I mean, it's funny to me now because you were talking about like perspective and hindsight. But when I think about some of those moments, in the moment, it all felt sort of like grand, life or death. Like I had to, whatever that moment was that I was in, a decision had to be made. And looking back in hindsight, you know, I've got a lot of historical context added into that. It probably wasn't as dire, but the reason it felt so dire is because I had maybe not listened to my internal voice enough, and I had just let it get so sort of out of whack from where it needed to be, that that it felt I felt desperation in the moment.
Totally. And that's, boy, yeah. And that's it. I think I lived just like that, how we just described that, for what I would describe as, I hope, the first half of my life. Then all of these sort of situations occurred. It was like, I think I said to you when we first started talking, my hustler had achieved. I found myself at a real professional pinnacle. I was on top of the system that I was part of, and I had finally some influence. I thought I had, I created this team of people who I deeply loved and cared about. We were doing work that we all deeply loved and cared about. And then these events started occurring that I would say sort of knocked me back to ground zero. After all those layers you just described that we get buried under, the trueness, the essence of you gets buried behind, those layers needed to be shed, from all the things, the roles I had occupied professionally and personally, the loss of a parent, the going away of my kids, menopause, like losses within my own body, and all sort of happening simultaneously. And what's interesting is at the same time in the universe, what was happening was COVID. I was catapulted into a leadership program that was breaking my heart wide open. I was also learning at the time how to lead Brené Brown's Dare to Lead work. And the reason I say that right now is because that had me digging deeply into like my own story with shame and vulnerability and connection and what all of that meant. And I was not conscious before that sort of breaking down period of how distant from myself I had been through the first half of my life. How it was sort of in my DNA to become a mother. That wasn't like a choice I made. It wasn't like I said, I can't wait to be a mom and I'm dying to be one. And like, I didn't even know that part of myself. It was the universe put me in situations that ended me pregnant and I became a mother and I loved it. Don't get me wrong. It's one of the most beautiful, wonderful, proud things I've ever done in my life is vessel those two human beings onto the planet that are precious. Wow, did I feel disconnected from myself when I was sort of complete with the final creation of them, when they got sent out into the world without me for college. I found myself looking back at myself like, where did I go? Who's here now? And then a lot of things had to fall apart, because I think that's how we get broken open, which in my case has been a gift because it's what's brought me back to myself from, through pain, lots of it, and grief and rediscovering and And then I think back to your point about choice making, that's where I think self-trust grows from, is when you start to listen to that inner voice and hear what your own truth is, and then act accordingly or speak accordingly to your own truth. Little trust light bulbs go off inside yourself as that happens.
Yeah, I have this, I guess we'll call it a belief, Kasey, that when we show up in ways that are consistent, not only does that build trust with others, right? When you're showing up consistently, and often that ties back to authenticity, but when you're showing up consistently, not only do people learn to trust you because their experience of you is the same, they're getting kind of the same feedback each time they are interacting with you, but it also builds confidence in ourselves. And I think when we can be consistent and, to your point, all those little trust lights kind of start flashing and, and you're like, okay, this feels familiar. This feels right. Like, and I keep showing up in this way that feels good. And so, the sort of general we talk a lot about reflection and, and even for myself, reflection is one of those things that I would have been like, oh, so woo woo. Like we're always talking about reflection. But now I talk about reflection all the time. It also means something different, I think, to me than maybe it meant when it was some sort of abstraction, when everyone's like, oh, you've got to reflect. And so, I would think about things like meditating or journaling or, and not to say that those aren't healthy practices, but at the time they didn't feel, authentic to who I was. And so reflection sounded like such a woo-woo thing. But I do think that if we don't take time to reflect, it's really hard, A, to start understanding like our intuitions. B, I think it gets really hard to understand kind of back to the core of what we're talking about here, those roles that we're playing and which ones feel true to who we are and which roles do we need to reject, or maybe it's not always just a rejection. And I think motherhood's a great example, at least for myself, because I don't have any issues with the fact that I'm a mom. I have a great child. Like that experience has been wonderful. But I don't, I'm never going to be the person who gets on stage and opens with, I'm a mom. Because mom is only one aspect of my roles in life. And I don't necessarily want to be defined by the definitions that people associate with mother. It doesn't mean that I'm not proud to be a mom. Mom is one of the badges I wear, but it's just one of many. And so it's, and that's not to maybe, I don't want to imply any sort of like demeaning to anyone who's like, mom is my number one job. Because I mean, if that feels authentic to your journey and your story and your roles, then that's what you should lead with. But for me, I don't necessarily want to be boxed in or limited in ways. There are, I guess for me, and maybe this is my own hangups, but I feel like there are some definitions of the role of mother that maybe feel like they're in conflict with other identities that I carry. And I don't want to give up aspects of those other identities in order to be boxed in by the definitions of mom. And so, it's just about deciding for myself.
Well, and you're right. This is the sort of the stake in our whole conversation, right? Reflection, journaling, meditation. For some of us, it's activity, movement, dance, whatever. What we're talking about here is increasing consciousness. We're talking about all of the ways, and there are a myriad of them, the ones we named and more, to learn how to listen to the sounds of your own inner voices and recognize that, like many of us, you probably have a team of voices, not just one. And so it's like inquire, where you can hear what's being said inside your own body and your own intuition, and then discern. Which one do I want to follow? How do I know that this is what I want? Be whoever you want to be. Just know that you're choosing it because you heard the sounds of your own intuition, and it's what she knows she wants, is the message I would send to my younger self. Because those decisions for me that I sort of found myself in but didn't quite know how, I don't know if I haven't, it's a point of reflection I haven't engaged in. Would I choose those for myself if I had it all to do over again? Some of what did get chosen for me or by me even, but outside of my own conscious awareness. That's I think there's kind of a movement, if you will, that's trying to happen right now among us all. And I think we actually have COVID in part to be grateful for, that there's a movement towards consciousness. Like, let's all take a pause and become aware of who we are and how we are, and start to, it's even it's permission granting that we as two women right now in the world are able to be sitting here having a conversation where we both produce our own shows in the world about what it is we want. Things weren't always that way, including for our moms. Women in that generation had, like, you want to be a teacher or a secretary or a nurse. Pick one of those three. So, we get to be new at it. And I understand how there's some shedding off of layers that were here before us, because that's the generational patterns that we came onto the planet with, right? And then I think, at least in my case, I can also feel this push from the other side that comes from my own daughter, who's 25, who's one of these brilliant, sort of steadfast and fierce, but in her own quiet, powerful way, pushing for her own uniqueness and individualization and identity in the world. Sort of saying, without rage or battle, but just taking a stand for, I will be who I am in the world, and that will be successful, in spite of what my parents think and my grandparents think. And so I can see us sort of bridging, right? The women who came before us and the women who are coming up after us. And I think these kind of conversations like we're having right here are absolutely needing to be had, and in public, so that the younger ones can see we don't have it all figured out. We too are going through a process that is trying to become ... and and in evaluation of what are all of the parts of me that are here, and what do they want, and how do you know when you found your most honest and authentic answer? I'm actually curious about you with that last question there. Like, how do you know when it's time to move forward in any way and that you're doing what is right for you?
I mean, for me, Kasey, I don't always know. Sometimes it takes that reflection and that hindsight to understand how I am processing, certain things. I think that, I'd like to believe I have a strong intuition, but I will say there have been periods in my life where I've turned it off to some degree. I listen to it less. And in those moments, I think is sometimes where some of that disconnect started to occur, where I started to kind of get off track from where I needed to be. And I am in the phase of the journey that I'm on right now is I'm trying to live like more whole. So, I have had a career experience that has put me in situations where I felt the need to code switch or compartmentalize or, be different people and not different people. I don't feel like I ever was an inauthentic person, but I do believe that I only brought portions of myself to certain situations or certain experiences and wasn't showing up in a way that kind of brought all those things together. And so I'm in this point in my life where for me, it's about trying to live in better alignment with my values and trying to live in a way that feels like whole. And then when I think about the way I show up in different spaces, it's more about intentionality in my authenticity. So I still might edit. There are still parts of me that maybe don't belong in certain spaces or certain experiences, but I want to be a little bit more intentional in making sure that I am bringing the parts of myself to that experience that I want to be there. Instead of, I guess I want to be more empowered than reactive to the situation.
The same words said just a little differently have been for me this year. The intention is to create my life more than react to it, you know? And that's in a nutshell, I think what was going on for me in the first half was reacting to it. And I also want to say this both for myself and everybody out there listening. I want to look back at that part of myself and say thank you because it was responsible for my survival. So, and I haven't always felt that way about it. Like I wanted to look back and kind of go, ooh, like, there you are performing again, or there's your like not totally authentic, or, oh, I remember that event and not being in my body at all. And I can't even remember what I said. I hope I sounded wise, or whatever. It took a lot of healing work to be able to look at past versions of myself and not look at it with disgust or shame, and instead to see it with grace and compassion and really recognize that all of that stuff is, the more vulnerable parts of me, I guess I'll say, thought that we needed to be safe in the world. And then it's from these moments like what you're talking about. This is what climbs you right up to the top of my hero list, Heather. And I really mean that. Seriously. Because for every moment that we all choose authenticity over any sort of version of hiding out, that's where the trust comes from. And the more we do that with ourselves and each other with compassion, like the more permission, it's permission giving. It has a ripple effect on ourselves and each other. It's, so I sort of spent the first half of life telling myself that I was healing the world. And then the middle part chapters were like, if you want to really help heal the world, heal yourself. And then now I suspect in this last half, and this is really what I'm already up to, is like, come to me and tell me the story of who you are. And let's talk about all of it without shame.
I just had a lightning bolt moment, Kasey. So when you were talking, I kept thinking about that phrase. They say, do unto others as you would do unto yourself. But I actually think it should be do unto yourself as you would do to others.
And all of that for me lives inside of this kind of polarity that you described of self and other, which I have been dancing my way through all of my life. And it's like it was completely overcorrected other to the neglect of self. Then I had to like completely flip the other way and get a little selfish for a little while in order, to clean and create. And I think now it's like finding its way into that leveraged middle. And I still don't know what all that's going to mean for me personally. But I know that now my come from place feels secure. And so it's like I have no idea how all of the external realities of my life want to unfold or are going to unfold. But now when I tell myself my favorite mantra, which is no matter what, you are going to be okay, I also know it's the truth.
Oh gosh, Kasey, that I mean, it's interesting to me whenever you and I speak, which I mean, we have quite a few times recently as we were leading up to this podcast. I find our conversations so reflective. And for me, I can only imagine the person who listens to this is going to be like, there's a lot of back and forth, like conversation, right? Like I experience this, I feel this, I'm responding to that. But I just find what we're talking about so like reflective in the sense that not only do I hear maybe universal themes that I resonate with, things that I think anybody on any kind of journey will find some sort of, value in, can relate with some aspect of what we're saying. But I also, it just like, it hits you, it just hits in a way that overwhelms. And tell me what you think about this in your own journey, Kasey. But, for a good portion of my life, especially as someone who, has felt like I've often put others' needs and feelings and everything before my own, all I've ever really wanted at the most simplest of levels is just a level of freedom. And when you were talking just before, you used the word selfish. And it's one of those words that I think about from time to time because I think we're often encouraged to be selfless. And being selfish is often seen as like a bad thing. And so then, you get into these weird nuances around concepts around things like self-care and how some people are like, well, self-care is not selfish, or, sometimes you need to be selfish and do self-care. And so there's like all this weird nuance around self, right? But then we applaud authenticity and we applaud self-awareness, and it's such a weird like dichotomy of like there's some tension happening there. And so all that sort of verbal meandering to say that most of my life I felt this desire for freedom. And as I mentioned already, there was a lot of code switching and all these things that were sort of happening in sort of my navigation of the world. And I carried, because of all that, a lot of anxiety. And so when my mind would have these like low points, so moments of relaxation or long drives in the car or a hot shower, like those moments where like the nervous system kind of just comes down, instead of fully coming down, then what would happen is my mind would start playing through all the experiences and conversations of the day and analyzing them to make sure that they had gone the way I thought they did and that I was showing up in the way I thought I did. And that's like the opposite of freedom. And so I will say at this place I'm in my journey now, where I'm doing less of that sort of compartmentalizing myself, right? I'm having less of those sort of running thoughts. The day I don't go through a day and then have the end of the day come and think, oh gosh, I now need to like reanalyze everything that happened today. The days aren't ending that way. And I don't want to say that they never happen. I mean, there are still, as someone who tends to be very heightenedly tuned into people, the subtlety of like people's behaviors, or, the nuance in the word choices that people make and that sort of stuff. I may not always latch onto those things in the moment, but later was when I replay them to say like, okay, I thought we were having a good experience or a bad experience or whatever it is. And like, now I need to rehash it one more time to make sure that I pulled at all the details to make sure I really understood. And I think that ties to you used the word control earlier. And I think control is also not freedom.
Yeah. In the Enneagram world, where I study these aspects of people and personality, everything you just described sounds just like my experience of my personality type as according to the Enneagram. And one of the things that they say is it is inside our personality type where we are most resourced and least free. Sometimes we have to breathe those words in a couple of times to really hear what they're saying. And so for me, everything you just described, the strategizing of relationship before it happens, the reflective analytics of relationship after it happens, I want to go get out of the inside of my head, Heather, because I've experienced all of that. And for me, the reflective analytics was often happening in a way where what I was really evaluating was myself. Did I hurt her when I said? Did he seem mad at me when did I feel her pull away when? It's like my mind was hyper analyzing and then hyper strategizing relationship, which is so telling, right? That there's some part in you that's feeling, I'm not secure in this relationship. This is not this for people who don't understand what I'm trying to say. These sounds inside your head are not what trust sounds like. freedom for me has meant the absence of all of that. And what I'm even heightened aware of nowadays in my world is how much free time my brain feels like it has now that it doesn't do all of that, where now it really gets to be empty-mindedness, which is ironically mindful, and or creative space, because I find myself with a blank canvas, which is pretty exciting and electrifying to go, what do I want to paint today? Instead of all of that other stuff that is so energetically expensive, and all at the root of it, at least for me, had wanting to stay in love and belonging, wanting to not be rejected by the relationships I cared about, and being on the lookout for anything that would even give me a whiff that that might be about to happen so that I could get in front of it and prevent it. That's what I mean when I talk about control. And so I'm even able to hold now that aspect of my personality with compassion when I understand why she was up to what she was up to. That's painful to be rejected from relationship. I didn't want that. You know, most of us don't want that. We're hardwired biologically for social connection. We need each other. The absence of all of that really means having built the trust to stand in the space of total uncertainty and show up for the conversation anyway. Kind of like you and me here today. And wouldn't you say it's true? We've had to go through sort of an adventurous journey to get to this now moment of uncertainty together. And I think it's even been reflective for me of everything we've been talking about, because this is vulnerable, what you and me do here for a living and what we invite others to come do with us. We don't know what we're going to say right before we say it. And we're choosing to open it up to the public.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to be perfectionist in an environment where you're just having a conversation. We've had a fairly philosophical discussion up to this point, Kasey, and I think we've touched a little on some professional things and some personal things. But kind of to ground us a bit now, when you take all of that philosophy, I would love to hear how that has impacted you both personally and professionally. And so I thought we'd start with the professional, right? You talked about going to school to be a therapist. You talked about being in a helping role. And from the things I know about you, you still are in that sort of helping space. And so could you talk about how this journey has impacted your professional journey, and then what influences it might be having on where you are right now and the decisions that you're making?
Well, so it's just the flip side of the coin, of course. You know, those same people I told you early in my life that professionally I rejected because they all worked for the federal government. Well, two of them, my mom and my sister, also along the way became professionally certified coaches. So that offering I decided I was wanting to receive. And so I wanted to speak the languages that were being spoken around my table. It's almost as if I grew up in a bilingual household, only the second language that was being spoken was about things like coaching and human resourcing and personality type. So while I was working as a social worker in child welfare, I was also on the side on my own going off and studying how to become a coach at the Coactive Training Institute. And I got completely trained and ultimately certified through them. And then I also went and learned how to do relationship systems coaching and was certified by them, and team coaching in the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. And so all of this is also because my mom and sister had paved the way for, and my brother, Gestalt coaching, had paved the way and shown me these things too. And so I drank them right in. Well, at the time, as I said, I had been working in child welfare, and I had wanted to bring back to the child welfare system these things that I was learning. I thought that this thing called coactive coaching was absolutely the medicine that the field of human services is starving for. So I said to some people when I got these learnings, like, I just learned this thing and I think we should adopt it. Well, nobody knew what I was talking about because I often come with these big philosophical ideas and don't have a great person like you on the other side going, now let's get grounded around it. But what ultimately happened is the universe shifted the way that it does. And I ended up going from like boots on the ground child protective services work into training others how to do that sort of work. And then ultimately became like on the national scale, I was training people how to do human serving type of work. And ultimately, I ended up back in Colorado and in charge of the learning and development system for human services. Well, the reason this is a good story is because then I was able to make coactive coaching the way forward. So I built a team and had them all trained and developed as coactive coaches. And then we got to start writing curricula and facilitating training and coaching leaders according to this methodology and this belief I have in how humans are best served and what the medicine should look and taste like. And I'm unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on perspective, retiring from that system was an important part of my breaking open process. There was something just about the health of the system that I really needed to step away from in order to do my own healing work. So I retired from that. I guess it's been about 5 years ago now, and have since been working in my own business that provides leadership coaching and consultation, and now also therapy and daring leadership training and facilitation. And now I get to do it with all sorts of different kinds of individuals and groups and couples and audiences. So I say all of that to say it's really kind of neat because when I look back at my whole story, while I want to package a lot of it in like I didn't know better, I wasn't conscious and I was reacting, the truth is I also gathered a lot of like skills and tools and wisdom and artifacts along the way that totally are fueling the fires of my success in life now.
When you think about that gathering process, we talked a little reflectively earlier about how, you know, some things happen to us, some things happen because we chose them, some things maybe happen for us. And, there was, we alluded, I guess, not, we didn't go deep, but we alluded to the idea of like, if we could go back and change it, would we? And I thought in the moment, I thought, well, do I want to open a conversation about like how changing things would change like where we are now on our journey? But instead of opening that particular can of worms, I want to talk a little bit about the collection of things that we gather, especially on a professional journey. And I typically am of the mindset that nothing is ever wasted, right? So, and I heard a little bit of that philosophy in your story where you're like, I did these things and I've collected these things along the way. And as I keep moving forward, this is how they're helping me. But I don't want to define your story. And so I guess I'm curious, Kasey, like, is that how you feel about these things that you've collected professionally along the way? Do you feel like nothing's wasted and they've all kind of been feeding into this future state of where you're going?
There's no such thing as waste, in my opinion. Only investment. What I really feel about it at this point when I look backwards is how each of those things I was gathering, if you will, professional learning experiences, they were happening for me. Like I can look back at all of them, and even though I said to myself, I'm going to this class because it's going to give me the tools I need to help these people, I was really there to grow a little more into the self I was becoming. And then I needed this other one to grow even a little more into that version of becoming. And it was all for me. I think it's not a coincidence that back when I was getting my bachelor's degree, we joked that we'd all have to go on for master's degrees because, we wore t-shirts that said things like, yes, I have a bachelor's in psychology. Would you like fries with that? And so, again, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I went and got my master's in counseling. But here I am today at 52 years old with a therapy practice that I love. I love what I get to do as a therapist. I consider that space so sacred that I get to hold and create and have intimacy with people and show people their capacity for intimacy and love. It's such a privilege. And what I know is true is I got the degree to do this work 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and I'm just now doing this work because I am just now healed enough to be in the space where this work can be real and effective. And I was like, and that truth, I guess, has been true all along. I was always doing the work and learning the thing, both that were just exactly what was needed for how healed I was in my own journey.
I want to point something out there, though, Kasey, because I really just want to emphasize what you just said. You were on the journey and you were doing the journey at the same time. And so I just really want to call that out, because I think often when we think about our journeys, our stories, and this really takes us back to the top of our conversation where we're like, you're in the moment, the journey's always evolving, that you were never really truly ready or finished or any of those words that make everything feel really neat and goal oriented. But the reality is sometimes you're gaining the skills or knowledge necessary as you are doing the thing. And I think that that's true whether you're on a deep personal journey or a professional journey or any journey. I think that's true of all journeys. And so I really just want to sort of double click on that, Kasey, because I think no matter who is listening and where they are in their process, that right there is the main takeaway, right? No matter what's going on, you are likely doing the thing while you're working on the thing.
Exactly. And because of that, then it's like, from there, who do you want to be right now? And how do you want to show up? And what's next for you? Like, it really is, now is all there is. But then when I get tangled up, it's like, so then how do you come into things like choice or decision making? Or I think in just, you've heard that quote, many people think that we are human beings who sometimes have a spiritual experience, when really what we are is spiritual beings having a human experience. That really resonates with me. And even as I hear what you're describing, I want to say, like, we're process people. Like, we live in the process of life more than the outcome. And I think it's another way to say everything that we've been talking about, which is to say that it's like myself is catching up to the process such that we're finally meeting, like we met, and now we're sort of flowing down the river together. And that's what lifted the fog. And that to me is what freedom means. And from here, there really doesn't need to be a lot of knowing.
This conversation, Kasey, reminds me of a song, and you and I talked about music the last time we chatted. And so there is this song by the artist Pink, and the title of the song is All I Know So Far. And when you were talking earlier about like the need to, break, there is this part of the song where she talks about like having to crack, but that's what like let the light in. And as we've continued this sort of philosophical discussion about like journeys and whether they be personal or professional, and how, you're collecting all this information, this experience, these like skills along the way, and it's all we know so far, right? And it's all we know so far. And so that song just, I don't know, it really, to me, goes well with the conversation that we've had.
I think we should at minimum maybe title the episode All I Know So Far.
I like it. It's a good plan. I will say though, Kasey, because we're coming to the end of the show and we did have a very big, broad, dynamic, sort of universal theme oriented conversation, If someone said this episode was way too long, I did not listen, what would you want them to sort of take away as the main message?
I love that question. I'm just going to say what I feel in this moment, and it's impossible for me to come up with anything otherwise. I feel my feet are totally rooted on the ground, and from there, I hold everything and all of you with grace. Like trust that it is all unfolding exactly as it should be. And whenever a question comes, remember that the answer is always love.
This whole conversation was about love. Kasey, thank you so much for your time and your vulnerability and the intimacy that you were willing to share in this space with me.
Thank you, Heather, for creating it for us. I mean that from the tips of my toes. This all felt really spacious and real and therefore rich. So thanks for being with me and all that means.
If you enjoyed this episode and are seeking to redefine success on your own terms, subscribe to Small Acts of Rebellion and join a community that celebrates authenticity and personal growth.